First of all, welcome everyone. You could have been doing anything on this Thursday evening and you decided to spend it with us. And we are just so grateful to have you for the launch of ACLU's Systemic Equality Campaign. And as you all know, in ACLU's 101-year history, we've always taken on the issue of equity. We committed 4 years ago during the Trump administration to do everything that we could to make sure that there was racial justice in this country and to really stand on the front lines of equity. And so we are not giving up that fight just because there is a new president, and we are lending our resources, our voice, our brand, and we hope that you will join us as we try to make this a more equitable country. That is who we are at ACLU, and it was only right that we take this on in a more strategic and holistic way, and to build on an equity platform, not just in a legal sense, not just in a legislative sense, and not just in an advocacy sense, but really doing all of that. And so I will introduce myself, and then I would love for the folks that I will be in partnership with tonight to also introduce themselves, as well as our ASL team. So I am Tanika Boyd. I have the pleasure most days of leading our organizing team here at the National ACLU. My pronouns are she and her. And right now I am reporting live from Harlem.
Happy to introduce myself next. Rakeem Brooks, I use he, him, his pronouns. Senior Campaign Strategist of the ACLU's National Political Advocacy Division. In case you ever hear someone refer to NPAD, that's what it is, the National Political Advocacy Division. And I'm co-leading with our colleague, Renika Moore, who is the director of the Racial Justice Project, the Systemic Equality Campaign. I'm dialing in from the Bronx, New York. I'm originally from Harlem though, but happy to rep the BX tonight.
And good evening, folks. My name is Jeff Robinson. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a deputy legal director and the director of the Trone Center for Justice and Equality at the National ACLU. And I am here and joining you tonight from Seattle, Washington, although my hometown is Memphis, Tennessee.
Oh, I should have known.
Ribs in the world.
I love it. I would love also for our ASL interpreters to introduce themselves and tell us their pronouns as well. Autumn.
Hi, my name is Autumn Saskill. I'm in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a little bit south of Milwaukee, and pronouns are her, hers. Nice to be here tonight. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I see we're at 932. So 932 of y'all decided to spend your time with us. So thank you so much. If you all can continue to populate the chat and also add your names, your pronouns, and your locations. I see folks have already started. We've been on a roll for the past 10 minutes with folks telling us where they are. I see a lot of Scottsdale. I've seen Chicago. I see New York City. So I'm so happy that you all are joining us. As we turn to the agenda, I just want to walk through a couple of things that we hope to accomplish tonight. We are so excited again for you all to join us on this journey. Systemic equality really didn't start at the ACLU overnight. We've been doing this work for years, even decades, but we really thought this was an incredible time to join with our allies to have a more robust agenda so that we can take on the issue of dismantling institutional and structural racism. So as you all introduce yourselves in the chat, we will be, introducing obviously our agenda. We will then spend some time discussing institutional and structural racism. We're going to talk a little bit about specific ways that these systems have impacted Black, Indigenous, and broadly people of color. And we're just going to work together to think through ways that we can dismantle these systems. And we're going to talk through some of the ways and the ideas that we think about, dismantling that system in real concrete ways. We're then going to talk through a set of logistics and some next steps. And then we are going to wrap for the evening. I'll turn it over to you, Ricky.
This unmute is more complicated than it looks. Thank you, Tanika. Really appreciate it. Again, Rakeem Brooks, I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm so excited that all of you could join us tonight. It's kind of outstanding and amazing to me that 950 plus of you want to spend your evening with us, but it just shows that the time is ripe for change. And I'm just going to walk you through our systemic equality agenda just a bit. We launched on February 9th, which, unknown to I think most of us, was also the day roughly 140 years ago or so that Jefferson Davis was sworn in as president of the Confederacy. So, history is always living with us. But the systemic equality agenda broadly addresses a waterfront of issues. Some of them are old to the ACLU and you'll be familiar with them, and some of them are brand new, but we're excited about them most. Let me walk you through the 7. The first is protecting and expanding voting rights. As you know, we had the largest turnout in history last year for the presidential elections. And since then, over 30 states have decided to attempt to pass over 100 bills limiting the right to vote, engaging directly in voter suppression. And so we're looking both to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act in 2021 in honor of Congressman Lewis, but also pushing the Biden administration to use its executive authority to appoint a U.S. attorney responsible for voting rights in every U.S. attorney's office. We're also looking to expand access to financial services through the post office. We felt like we got a big win this week. The president has announced that he is nominating 3 new governors to the Postal Board of Governors. And in so doing, he should be able to enable the post office to use pre-existing authority to provide services like check cashing, bill pay, money transfers, in addition to things like money orders, which many low-income Americans and unbanked and underbanked Americans already have access to. If we can achieve that this year, we can save families over $2,800 a year on average. That's the average American family. 1 in 4 people use these services. We also could save Black families in particular over $80,000 over their lifetime. So we consider this to be a huge priority of ours. Student debt cancellation. I just published a piece in Forbes trying to make the point that this isn't about students who went to Harvard, Yale, or Penn. It's really about equity for all of us. And if we're able to cancel $50,000 worth of student debt, we can reduce the racial wealth gap by 22% just by canceling student debt alone. And that would have a major impact on systemic equality. Establishing a permanent child tax credit. This is a big priority for us. The president and the Congress are already moving forward with an enhanced tax credit that would provide $3,600 for children under the age of 6 and $3,000 for children over the age of 6. What you may not know is that this will cut childhood poverty by over 40% in our country and 50% for Black and Latino students, Black and Latina children. I can't imagine a more consequential social policy in our lifetime. And so right now, the bill that's being proposed would be temporary. It would only last a year. We've got to make this permanent in America. Child poverty has got to become a thing of the past. Advancing fair and affordable housing. We're going to push the Biden administration to pursue a rule that was passed in the Obama administration that really didn't have a chance to live because we are still living with the remnants of segregation. I mean, we're presently living in segregated communities. You may not know that, I guess in 1980, Black folks lived with something like 30 or 40% white folks. I don't have it directly in front of me, but that percentage hasn't increased by very much. Mostly Blacks and Latinos have started to integrate with one another. Latinx folks have started to integrate with one another, but we still are a segregated society. Expanding access to broadband. The emergency broadband benefit is now available to low-income families, $50 a month. We've got to do more. We've got to make sure that every American family has access to broadband. Broadband is to the 21st century what electricity was to the 20th century. And so it is essential It is essential to our democracy and to being able to access equal opportunity. And finally, something that our good friend and leader, Jeff Robinson, has been working on for the past few years, passing legislation on reparations. We are supporting HR 40, which is a committee to study reparations for Black Americans, because we think it's time. And we're looking for a congressional committee in particular, because if we can establish that, it can happen on a bipartisan basis, and we as a country can squarely look in the face our history of slavery and its impacts in present day society. So that's the agenda. There are many more things that we could be covering, and so it's worth saying at the outset that this is just a start. These are the things that we agreed to begin with, but there's so many more things that we're looking to do and that we will be doing in the coming years. And so thank you for, again, joining us. We'll talk more about this across the night, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Good evening, folks. This is Jeff Robinson, and I think I'm going to take just a few minutes to talk about systemic racism. Because one of the things that I've learned as a lawyer is that it's important to define your terms so that people know what you're talking about. When I say the word racism, I do not mean prejudice. I can walk into any room in America and be the most prejudiced person in that room, but I can't be a racist in America, because racism is not the equivalent of prejudice. Racism is prejudice plus social power plus legal authority. And Black and brown and indigenous people in America have never had the latter two. Not when we were brought here as enslaved people, not during the civil rights movement, and not when Barack Obama was in the White House. So when I talk about racism, you already understand that there is a structure to that racism. And one of the best ways I think I can ask you to think about it is to go back with me to January of 1865. The Civil War is basically ending, and the North knows that they're going to win. And so secretly, Secretary of War William Stanton and General Sherman, the one who made the march across Atlanta, they met in Savannah, Georgia with 20 freed Black men in secret. And how do we know that they met? Because they thought they were doing something important, so they wrote it down. They wrote down the list of questions that they asked these 20 free Black men about what can we do to make sure that you're going to have the best opportunity at freedom when the war is over. And the answer that they got was amazing. We want land. That's all we want. And here's who's going to work it: the women, the children, and the old men. Because the young men are going to go into service for the government. General Sherman was so impressed that 4 days later, he issued Special Field Order 15. Most Americans refer to that as 40 acres and a mule. And Black, freed, enslaved people were given property from South Carolina all the way down the coast into Florida, but it was taken back after Lincoln was assassinated and Andrew Johnson became president. That is the beginning of structural racism in modern times, because I go back to 1865 because some of those decisions about land had an impact in modern times. Almost a century later, Martin Luther King, about 6 months before he died, talked about the Homestead Act, which was passed by Abraham Lincoln at the same time, basically, and was going into effect at the same time that they were taking back the land away from the Blacks that had been given it after the Civil War, right after 1865. What the Homestead Act did is to say, if you paid about $3 or $4, you got 160 acres of land. And if you lived on it for 5 years, it was yours. And by 1900, more than 80 million acres of land had been given away to white settlers. So when you hear the term affirmative action, don't be thinking about quote unquote programs of uplift for Black people in the 60s and 70s, because America has been about affirmative action for its white citizens ever since the country was granted. And what King said about this in 1967, about the Homestead Act and taking that land away from recently freed Black people. Not only did they give the white settlers the land, they built land grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates so that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, in the 60s, these farmers were being paid millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm. And they're the people telling Black America to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. That's structural racism. It's the structures that exist that explain why things are the way that they are. Why is it that so many Black people can't vote? Because of prior felony convictions. And then you find out that it's interesting, right after the Civil War, when we were freed, 13 of the 38 states that existed at that time started passing massive felony disenfranchisement laws. And you know what the pattern was? In the states where they had large numbers of Black prisoners, those states would either pass those laws or expand the laws that were there. And in the states like Maine, where they had few or no Black prisoners, those laws either didn't exist or were very, very restricted. So this is just an example of the kind of structures that can be put into place. People think that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in America, and it didn't, because it said it's abolished except for those convicted of a crime. And so the structure of the 13th Amendment and the way the law has developed in terms of what we can do to people that are incarcerated, how much we can make them work without paying them, how we can slap them into private prisons who make a profit on their incarceration, how we can have 50,000 collateral consequences that people convicted of a crime will face when they come out of prison. These are the structures that help explain why America looks the way it does today. And so when you think of structural racism, I'll ask you to think about these things that are in place. They weren't put there by accident. Think about redlining in housing. Think about predatory loans in banking. Think about the importance of home ownership to a family's net worth. And then ask yourself what impact it had when you hear that from 1934 to 1962, white Americans got 98% of all government-backed loans to buy homes. This is what we mean by structural racism. And these are the structures that the ACLU is trying to address, not just in an individual way, but in a holistic way.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate that overview. And sorry for the delay. I've been trying to respond to all the excellent questions that are coming through in the chat as quickly as I can. I'm glad that you all are engaging so much. And Jeff is just a fount of knowledge on all these issues and has thought about them for so long and so hard. What we're going to do now is basically have a conversation among the three of us about the Systemic Equality Campaign. And where I wanted to start with a question directed both to Tanika and Jeff. I've only been at the ACLU for, on Monday, it'll be 6 months. So I don't know anything. And I feel like a lot of folks are sort of surprised that the ACLU has jumped into the racial justice fight, or at least that's the narrative that is sort of walking around since we launched 2 weeks ago. So I'm wondering, maybe we'll start with Tanika, give Jeff a chance to breathe. Could you tell us a little bit about how the ACLU comes to this fight? What history do we have on issues of racial justice that prepare us for this particular moment?
Well, I've only been here 2 days longer than you. And so, of course, I will lean on the icon, the legend himself, Jeff Robinson. But I want to talk a little bit about people power. So people power, which is part of the team that I get to manage every day, was really founded after, the Trump administration came in and took on this Muslim ban. And we, a legal advocacy organization that is historically taken on inequity and racial justice issues, we've really been at the forefront of some of the most iconic both cases and legislation out there. We've always kind of led with those values in mind. But we really left some of the people movement, the organizing, to a lot of the affiliates, and we're in every state across the country. But this was a snapshot in a moment in time for ACLU, and we really had to lean on our values. And so we cultivated a base of supporters that now is about 600,000 action takers out of the 8 million people that correspond and interact with ACLU every day, whether that is a donor or someone who sees themselves as a supporter or someone who's taking action online on behalf of ACLU. We cultivated this team, and there are people that make phone calls on issues that are really important, whether those are issues surrounding women's health and women's rights issues. We're taking, we're doing door knocking before COVID, and we're, click to tweeting for legislation that really matters. So I think it's really ripe for ACLU to take this on, because we have a serious legacy of doing this work, but we've also cultivated a base of supporters who have said to us that they want to take on the issues of criminal justice that currently marginalize Black and brown folks, that they want to make sure that they're at the forefront of issues like family separation and deportation. And so we are being led by those issues and the people who are really telling us that these are issues that they want to be a part of. And there is no better time to do that work than now.
As always, eloquent. Jeff, is there anything you want to add to that piece? I know that you've been working for a few years now on the reparations piece of what we've been doing. Help us contextualize that, and also what the Trone Center focuses on.
Well, the Trone Center focuses on criminal law reform and racial justice work. And so it's clear to anybody that has worked in the criminal legal system, the impact of race is clear. I was a criminal defense lawyer for 34 years before I came to the ACLU 5.5 years ago. And so the impact of race in the criminal legal system was absolutely clear to me. And it was one of the reasons I came to the ACLU, to try and take a bigger swing at that. The racial justice program is in the Trone Center. And you've already mentioned that Renika Moore, the director of that program, is working with you to kind of guide this work. And the racial justice program has done all kinds of work on racial justice that the ACLU has been involved in. And we have been involved in work on fines and fees, work on bail, work on all kinds of things that impact people of color in this country, specifically Black Americans, when you're talking about the criminal legal system, because we're 13% of the population and 40% of the incarcerated population. One of the things that I came to understand is that I could fix everything in the criminal legal system tomorrow. And if we did nothing else, the system would repopulate itself exactly the way it looks today in a very short period of time. And so fixing the criminal justice system, fixing every procedure, every technique, everything about the way that system operates is critically important. But that's not going to solve the problem. If you fixed racism, you would solve the problems of the criminal justice system. So it's the other way around. And I think that's where HR 40 has become so important. Many people think, oh, that's just pie in the sky. There have been 2 congressional hearings on HR 40. The first one on Juneteenth of 2019, and the last one February 17th of this year. There are almost 170 co-sponsors on HR 40. And let's be clear about what it is. It is a commission, as you said, Rakeem, to study the issue and to make specific recommendations for reparatory justice, both legislation, executive orders, administrative rules, to make specific recommendations. So it is a remedy bill, not just a study bill. And many people say that's pie in the sky. Tell it to Abraham Lincoln, because in 1862, right before he passed the Emancipation Proclamation, he kind of quietly passed what was called the Compensated Emancipation Act. And that act formed a commission, and it paid $1 million in 1862 money to Washington, D.C. slave owners for loss of property because slaves were about to be emancipated. In 1988, we paid $1.6 billion to Japanese Americans for 3.5 years of internment during World War II. And the support from the Japanese American community for this bill, HR 40, was unbelievable. They sent 300 letters into the congressional record earlier this month. And one of the witnesses who testified spoke eloquently about how their fight for reparations was on the exact same par with Black Americans' fight for reparations. So don't let folks tell you that it's never been done before, because it has. The issue is whether we will have the political will to address this in a holistic way, because time is running out. And in my view, this is America's last best chance to move forward on racial justice. Because if we roll back from this point, I don't know what we're rolling back to.
I appreciate that so much, Jeff. And that's why reconciliation is one of the key components of our systemic equality agenda. We basically say there are 4 things we're seeking: reconciliation, access to housing and broadband, as I described, prosperity through our racial wealth gap work, and empowerment through our voting rights work. And just as I've been going through the questions, someone asked about redistricting. Yes, redistricting is one of our major foci. And so we're just trying to develop a real strategy about doing this nationally. As you know, each state has its own redistricting process. If anybody's capable of dealing with a state by state kind of fight and battle, it's the ACLU, but we got to be thoughtful about it. And so you'll hear something about that, I think, in the coming months, but I wanted to point out that someone brought it out.
And Rakeem, can I just say that one of the things about our reparations work, folks should understand the ACLU is not a leader on reparations. Our board just in 2019 approved us supporting HR 40, and they did it very, very quickly when it was put in front of them. But there are Black-led organizations that have been working on these issues for decades. The National African American Reparations Commission, NCOBRA, National Commission of African Americans for Reparations. These organizations have been tilling this ground for decades, and what we are doing in our fight is supporting them. So we have helped put on forums in Charleston, South Carolina, in Washington, D.C., virtually from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and New York City. And next month, we're putting on a virtual forum from Seattle, Washington, to talk about the connection between reparations for Black Americans and the Japanese American movement for reparations. All of these forums are being planned by NARC and NCOBRA. All of these forums, when we talk about who is going to speak, it's not ACLU speakers, it's the people who have been working on these issues, people from the Japanese American community who are now going to come and continue to lend their support. Our role, quite frankly, is we pay for the forums and we help set them up. And then we get out of the way so that this work can be done. That is incredibly important. Don't get me wrong. Doing what we are doing is incredibly important to the reparations movement. But all of the systemic equality platform and all of us internally at the ACLU have discussed this. We are walking into areas where other people have been tilling this ground, and our work is going to be done in respect to those people and with those people, not in a way of pushing those people aside and coming in saying, hey, we're the ones that have all the solutions.
Amen. As always, when Jeff finishes speaking, you just rock back and forth and say, all right. Let me move us forward a bit and just ask, what excites you about the systemic equality agenda? This is the first time that the ACLU has ever made racial justice its primary ask of an incoming administration. It's the first time in 101 years that we've been led. Our president by a Black woman, our president, Deborah Archer, is now president of the ACLU's board. So that excites me, and you all should read much more about Deborah. But what about you two? Like, I came to the ACLU to do this work. Literally, Ronnie Newman was like, I got a project I think you might be interested in. And I was like, tell me a little bit more about, oh, that's what it is? All right, I'm gonna leave private practice and come do real work. But talk to me about, you all have been here. What's got you, giving you chills about what we're doing?
I think Jeff Robinson's life's work obviously gives me chills. I think to be able to think through that and study that from a congressional perspective, and also to implement that, and for ACLU to take that on, I think it is the right step. I want to just go through a couple of statistics about what is really exciting me, and then hopefully you can indulge me in a small narrative. But I think the crisis of student loan debt is just an issue that every organization who cares about equity should be taking on. We're talking about 43 million Americans who hold some kind of student debt, averaging, about $30,000 in debt, over $1.3 trillion in student debt in America. And for Black women, it's averaging about $37,000 in debt. And we know that Black women are more than likely taking on social working jobs, or more than likely taking on teacher jobs and nursing jobs that are really the backbone of Black communities. And so when you look at zip codes where there is a high majority of Black people, there is a disproportionate number of Black women who are just straddled by student loan debt. I mean, you're talking about debt that surpasses credit card debt, that surpasses auto debt. It's higher, there is more debt than there was during the Great Recession. And in the past 30 years, it is really increased by over 1,000%. And we also know that a lot of this debt is coming from for-profit institutions. Many folks aren't just graduating with student loan debt. Some people aren't necessarily making it to graduation. And so my first real experience with student loan debt is I remember being 12 years old, and my mother was getting her, tax returns. And, in inner city communities and, the community that I grew up in, tax season was a good time because you were able to pay off old bills, and you were able to buy a couple of new things and get some new groceries. And my mother opened that check, and I'll never forget. She opened that envelope and it was completely empty. And her wages were garnished because she went to college for a year. And I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in a zip code that has the highest incarceration rate in the country. And it was time for my mother, when she did 1 year in college, to go take on a job, because that's what you did. You went to do factory work. And then after she had her children, she got her wages garnished. When I think about student loan debt, I think about my sister, who is a single mom, who is currently working 2 jobs trying to pay off her student loan debt. I think a little bit about myself, though I'm not the perfect victim here, but I think about someone like me who has already paid, 6 figures in student loan debt. And I just think about all of the Black women who are just straddled by the student loan debt and unable to really get to the middle class or to pass on generational wealth. And if we're talking about really taking on the racial wealth gap, I'm really excited that ACLU has decided to take a firm stance in pushing this administration on student loan debt.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like you started off saying, I mean, I think we're approaching $2 trillion in student loan debt.
Mhm.
And it's totally underappreciated the extent to which Black communities, and not only Black communities, I mean, as we all believe, systemic racism affects all of us. Black people are just the canary in the coal mine, just indicating that there's a larger systemic problem. But right now I'm in my cousin's house. She set me up, got me a little light and whatnot. And if you looked at her resume, you would think, well, this woman doesn't need relief from student loan debt. She's got an MBA and a PhD. No one asks where she came from, what the deficits were that were the result of systemic racism inflicted on our family. My grandmother came, fled the South in Birmingham, Alabama. I mean, a small town called Jefferson, but you all wouldn't know where that is. So Demopolis, actually, but you wouldn't know where that is. So I'll just say Birmingham. Fled there to come to New York. And of course, this wasn't the land of opportunity for our family. And so now what's my cousin up doing? She's paying, for her nieces and nephews. She wants to have a family of her own. My grandmother needs support. We're all constantly taxed because of that past segregation. And so that's why it's not just about student loan debt. It's also about housing segregation. It's also about postal banking, giving people access to essential financial services. But Jeff, I wanted to give you an opportunity to phase back in again on those points because you're the elder of the group. You've got a broader perspective in this respect about how things have changed and the extent to which they haven't changed and these sort of compounding effects of racism. And let me just make one more point because people have been asking about why isn't $10,000 enough? And basically what I say is that the American dream costs more for Black Americans. For every dollar a white student spends on their college education, Black Americans are spending $1.50 at least. And then you have compound interest. So if you imagine that the average amount of debt for a Black student were $10,000, and the average amount of debt for a white student was $10,000, and the average amount of debt for a Black student was $15,000. Well, you might say, well, both of them got $10,000 forgiven, so what's the problem? The Black student just has $5,000 worth of debt. It's called compound interest, right? It's the same thing, same phenomenon, right? These things multiply themselves over time. So while that white student who only owed $10,000 now can go ahead and live their life freely and benefit from compound interest, the Black student still suffers from compound interest. And that's the kind of structural racism that we're talking about. But Jeff, like I said, can we talk a little bit about the fair housing piece of this, the access to essential financial services, to broadband? I mean, all these pieces fit together. And I thought you might be able to help folks understand that.
Well, just, taking up the last thing you said, access to broadband. How are they sending out notices that you're eligible for the COVID vaccine? They're sending them out over the internet. And if you don't have a computer, and if you don't have access to high-speed internet, how easy do you think it is for you to get an appointment to get a vaccine? That's just a very, very simple demonstration of how there are roadblocks between me and the vaccine, or people that look like me in the vaccine, and roadblocks that are not there for many of the other people in American society. And so I think, when you're talking about money, it's a very funny thing. From 1865 to 1950, Brian Stevenson's organization has identified about 6,000 lynchings that were documented, lynchings of Black Americans. That's an average of more than one lynching every week for 85 years after the Civil War. But what was happening during part of that time period in terms of money? In 1880, 15 years after the Civil War, whites owned $36 for every dollar Black Americans owned. But then something weird started happening. By 1890, it was 25 to 1. By 1900, it was 23 to 1. And by 1910, it was 16 to 1. And then for the next century, It hardly moved at all. And so the economic wealth gap is tied to the structural racism that we have been talking about. Why would you be surprised at this wealth gap if Black people are redlined out of home ownership? If Black people are denied admission into unions so they can't get high-paying jobs? If Black people are being arrested for vagrancy, put into jail, losing their rights to vote, losing, and then coming out facing collateral consequences, it's going to prevent them from moving forward in the economy. One of the things that scared the hell out of me, quite frankly, in 2016, a report by the Institute for Policy Studies and the Corporation for Enterprise Development. And they said, they found these things, and I just want to read them so that I'm accurate. They found that written in 2016, for the past 30 years, the average wealth of white families had grown by more than 3 times the rate for Black families. The wealth of the Forbes 400 richest Americans had grown by 736%, 27 times the rate of growth for Black families. And by 2043, the year it's projected that people of color will be a majority of the American population, the wealth gap between white families and Black families will have doubled again. And what they're saying is that without specific action, it will take Blacks about 228 years from 2016 to get to where whites were in 2016. Of course, whites will have moved on by then. So the wealth gap that you're talking about is a gap that has resulted because of very deliberate structural decisions that we made in America to advantage white people over people of color. And the only way to address that, you said, Rakeem, you talked about reconciliation and how that is so important, and it is. But the only way you can have reconciliation going forward, the only way you can have healing going forward, is if you acknowledge what happened to bring us here. There has to be a reckoning before there can be reconciliation. And this is something that we can accomplish. So what I'm excited about is that 5.5 years ago when I came here, there was a debate in the ACLU in our smart justice work, smart justice in the criminal legal system. Are we going to specifically talk about race? Because we may lose some people if we do. Look how far this organization has come in 5.5 years. And so that's what excites me. And the fact that we are ready to address this as a holistic program impacting all of our work, that tells me that the ACLU is ready to take a major leadership step forward as we go into this next century.
Again, I don't know what to say after that, Jeff, but I'll just quickly, I know our time is coming to an end, and I just want to contextualize a little bit for those who joined us late, and I see people are starting to leave. So let me just remind you, the reason for this session was to level set about the systemic equality agenda, to get everybody on the same page about what the ACLU is doing, why it's doing it, and how you can participate in what we're doing. And so this was the first session, but we're going to have 6 others, and I just want to read them out to you quickly and let you know that you can find them, you can RSVP for them on aclu.org/systemic equality. But we're going to have the first session on voting rights on March 11th at 8 p.m. We're going to have the second session on postal banking on March 25th at 8 p.m. Student debt on March 8th at 8 p.m. You're getting a rhythm. Child care tax credit, the child tax credit on April 22nd at 8 p.m. Broadband and housing, a session dedicated to access issues on May 6th at 8 p.m. And finally, Jeff is going to join us again on HR 40 on May 20th, the day after my birthday. So I'll treat it as, it'll be a treat to me, on May 20th at 8 p.m. We're going to continue to have these discussions in greater depth. I've seen so many excellent questions in the Q&A, and I'm hating that I can't get to all of them. But those will be opportunities to really dig into specific issues at that point. So since we're starting with voting rights, maybe we give people a little preview. Maybe we can also wrap up now. I thought we'd talk about the miracle in Georgia, how much hope it gave us, our affiliate down there, our executive director, Andrea Young, and Christopher Bruce, who's the political director down there, did amazing work to create a multiracial coalition led by Black folks, but a multiracial coalition to enhance the ability of this country to move forward on civil liberties. And so I wanted to kick it to Shanika because we were having discussions back and forth before this happened. Can this work? Won't it work? You know, do we really believe? So what's your assessment now about Georgia? Clearly there's a backlash. There always is a blacklash, as they say, right? But give us your thoughts about that to the extent you're able, and I know you're able. Give us your thoughts about that, and let's try and wrap up a little bit. If there are any parting words you want to give to the audience?
The story of Georgia is the story of organizing, the story of years of investment in Black and Brown communities, putting people first, helping them understand that they can be a part of the story of reforming both their own lives and a political system that oftentimes has left them behind. And now they have some representative leadership, but representation is not power. Right? It is simply representation, and it is an opportunity for folks to push forward and hold accountable folks. But we are fighting for power. We are fighting for people power, essentially, and we want to be able to write the script and make sure that every person in this great nation of ours feels equitable and feels seen. I want to just pivot really quickly as we close to say that we have a saying in organizing that we have just outlined for you the world as it is, right? The world as it is a host of structural inequities that has manifested itself in racism. It has manifested itself in inequitable voting, in compounding student debt, in poor banking, lack of childcare, lack of access to housing and broadband, and a greater and deeper need for reparations for generations of these inequities. But we are fighting for the world as it should be, right? That is what we are fighting for. We are fighting for the world as it should be. We have a window of opportunity, and we want to make sure that you all understand the importance of organizing and what it means. It means it allows us the ability to really create the reality and the world that we want. And in order to do that, we need your help. We need your engagement. We need your constant voice on these issues. We need you to be able to say to this administration that you stand with the ACLU, that you care about systemic equity, that there is no greater time than now to dismantle structural racism, and that you believe in this platform. And if we move forward, it will be a beautiful story for all Americans. So I am thrilled that you all joined us at what will be 9 p.m. on a Thursday night on the East Coast for this agenda. And I want you all to click the link in the chat. I think folks from our team are dropping a link in the chat. And I want you to RSVP to some of the sessions or all of the sessions that Rakeem outlined. We're going to have a great time, and we're going to go in depth and talk about all of these issues in detail. This is really an overview, but we will also have different actions for you to take, whether that is calling, emailing, texting, showing up for things, meeting with folks, because we need your help and we need your commitment to fight for the kind of world that we want to see. And we also want to hear from you all. We think your voices are so important. We want to center the narrative of everyday people who care about these issues. So we're also dropping an additional link in the chat, and we hope that you will be able to fill that out and tell us, why are you supporting systemic equality? What does this mean for you? Why is it important to dismantle structural racism? What are you fighting for? And what I really love to say is, who are you fighting for? What is the vision you can imagine that this country should live up to? And what are the things that we want the Biden administration to do? So thank you all for everything that you've done tonight, and also just committing to real change and to helping us lift up this work, both through legislation and policy and legal action, but also through organizing and advocacy.
Jeff, you want to give us up to 2 minutes, and then I'll close this out?
I don't know if I can follow that up, Tanika. I love what you're saying, and I think what I will say is something I read recently. Hope is caused by action. It's not the other way around. So the reason I have hope is because of all the action I see people taking, because of all the action I see this 101-year-old organization taking in a serious way with a commitment of time and resources and people. That's what gives me hope. So if you're looking for hope, take a look in the mirror, and what you're doing can provide some of that hope.
Thanks, Jeff. For you to say you were stunned by Tanika, it's like the student has become the teacher at just the right time. We're feeling good about that.
I'm glad that was recorded.
Thank you. All right. Well, look, everyone, still stunned that so many of you are with us. Over 900 participants still present. It's dropping a little bit, so let's end this. I want you to know that by the morning, you're going to get an email from us that lays out the next steps and how you can continue your engagement in the Systemic Equality Action Series. So please keep an eye out for that. As Tanika said, there were 2 links dropped in the chat. We want the Biden administration to know that you support this agenda, every element of it. And if there are specific elements that are important to you, why those specific elements are important to you. The more they hear from us, the more they know we're serious. And we're having conversations all the time, but there's nothing like our members reaching out directly to the administration to say, this is what it is, and this is what we expect from this administration. So please also save the date for our next session on voting rights. As I said, it's going to be 2 weeks from today, March 11th. At what time? 8 p.m. like all the sessions. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out via info@peoplepower.org. Again, that's the primary means by which we organize our members to take action. And that's the primary way by which we'll be organizing our members to take action on this particular agenda. So just thank you again for being here with us. Thank you to Tanika and Jeff for everything that you do. As I said, I'm new to the organization, but it's people like these that made it the reason I wanted to join and to keep me here doing this work. So again, thank you for this evening, and to everyone who joined us.
Good night.
Thank you both. Good night, everyone.
Good night. And to our ASL, please, thank you so much. I always enjoy watching y'all. Y'all seem to be having a better conversation than what we're giving everybody. So it's too exciting. But thank you. I
know,
again.
And they can keep up with me. I speak so fast.
I know.
I appreciate that.
Well, as I said, we're looking forward to seeing everybody at the next few sessions. Please stay tuned. And if you can't join the sessions for any reason, I should make this point. We will record the sessions. They will be available, and People Power will be in contact with you in innumerable ways to tell you how to be involved in this agenda. So if 8 p.m. on Thursdays don't work for you, we apologize for that scheduling. We just wanted to make it consistent so you knew when it was happening. But we're going to engage you and figure out ways to make your voices heard in this fight for systemic equality. Have a good night.
Good night.